Welcome to episode 2 of Signalling Failures with me, Chris McGrory, the signalling guy. Now, last week 2 weeks ago, this is bi-weekly, 2 weeks ago when I released the first episode of Signalling Failures on the Friday, on the Monday there was big news about the number of signalling related failures, and it was a total coincidence. So I've already claimed on my socials and my YouTube that I'm not guilty for causing that bit of press coverage. This is pretty negative stuff for the railway, and I'm an old cynical railwayman like a lot of people, but not guilty for that particular piece of coverage, and I didn't know that was going to come out. It was in no way tied to the launch of my podcast. But I did defend signalling a little bit and explain, which is on my channel, you can find it. Those headlines about signal failures were a little bit inaccurate. So I put that right a little bit and gave my perspective on it. So my first episode was about Colwich Junction, or Colwick Junction, whatever it's called. If you notice something different, let me know. If you're from the Midlands and I'm abusing your place names, let me know. I apologise. But that was inspired by the help I've had from my brother-in-law, who's a train driver, and often signalling engineers and train drivers are sometimes not always working perfectly together, but we usually do. And so that inspired episode 1. Episode 2 was inspired by something completely different, and then in the news, as I keep an eye on the sexy signalling news, what's hot and what's trending in signalling, I noticed, actually there's a wider railway bit of news, that this station, Liverpool Lime Street, had an anniversary. Now, two things which really surprised me, which will come up in the episode, which you can watch in a minute. I found out about Liverpool Lime Street, and I'm going to cover them in the podcast. And I've also said in the past, you'll see it on my Instagram and stuff, you maybe see it elsewhere on YouTube, that becoming a signalling engineer is kind of a study of all the accidents that we've had and making sure that you don't repeat them. It's kind of one of those, everybody makes mistakes, but let's not repeat the same mistakes. So being a signalling engineer is applying a lot of the learning where, we did a good job, we had thought things out, we thought about failures and what could go wrong, and we planned for that. And then circumstances occurred that we didn't quite anticipate. So being a good signal engineer is applying all of those in the right situations from the past, making sure they don't happen again. That's one thing people are very hot on. And Lime Street is one of those where we have a set of controls for an incident that happened. Quite what that incident was and quite what Lime Street controls are, we will get to now in the episode. So let's go. Let's jump in. Now let's get ourselves a little picture of Lime Street. Give you some context. Lime Street station in Liverpool. Are there other Lime Streets? I don't know. Oh, there's a Lime Street in Glasgow. Okay, Lime Street, Liverpool. Thank you, Google. Let's get on the map. So in the news, Network Rail revealed on its socials that Liverpool Lime Street, now I think I said on one of my Instagram reels that I think it was 125th anniversary, but that kind of seemed a little bit too much to me, which is surprising considering I have got a pretty good knowledge of some of the history of signalling. And if you are one of the people who saw me teaching at Birmingham a little bit about signalling, you will have I hope you recall, me trying to blow your mind by telling you that the Absolute Block system, Absolute Block, we still use it today, Absolute Block is approaching its 200th birthday. For real, that's true. That's a true story. So then I was kind of I was a bit reluctant to say off the top of my head that Lime Street was 125 years old. Lime Street Station in Liverpool was opened on the 15th of August. Now I'm doing this a little bit late, this was the middle of last week. But the 15th of August, Yes, 1818. 1836. So I spoke about on the course I was doing and a bit of training I was doing, I spoke about Absolute Block being kind of built around the electric telegraph, which is invented in 1842. Lime Street Station was opened in 1836. It is 188 years old this year. Keep in mind I'm recording this in 2024. August of 2024. 188 years old. And it is the oldest still operating Grand Terminal station in the world. In the world. The oldest operating terminal station in the world. In your face, Glasgow Central. In your face, London, Victoria, King's Cross, anywhere. There you go, Liverpool. So big points to Liverpool. It was an extension, of course, to the original L&M, so the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, George Stephenson's rocket, all of that. Massive bit of railway history. Lime Street wasn't opened originally with the L&M. The original station, if you're down there in Liverpool, you're doddering about Liverpool, and you happen to come across Crown Street Park, and you think, this is an oddly large flat area. Crown Street used to be a station. Crown Street was the terminus of the L&M when it opened, and the Lime Street station was opened maybe 6 or 7 years after the opening of the L&M. And I mean, that's so old. That's actually, although I know how old Absolute Block is, how old Lime Street is still blew my mind. So you're talking the L&M, the first passengers on the L&M. Now, L&M's famous for a couple of things. Stephenson's rocket, kind of everybody knows. The first passenger. So, for context, here's recently opened Borders Railway. What else opened? Leaving. The Leaving branch line opened in Scotland. So the usual dignitaries go on it. Heads of Network Rail, local councillors, politicians. You know the types. I don't think was King Charles on it? I didn't see him on it. Maybe he didn't like the train. Don't know. Answers in the comments. Was King Charles at Leaving? I pity him if he was. There's not a lot to see. It's good that they've opened a new rail link, but I don't think there's a lot to see in Leaving. I've not rushed over. I digress. So, first day of the new railway. It's not a new idea to put dignitaries on it. The dignitaries on the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester, shortly before Lime Street was opened, included the Duke of Wellington. Yes, the Duke of Wellington. The guy famous for the boots. The welly boots guy. Also, you may know him for defeating Napoleon at Waterloo. If you're a big ABBA fan, you'll know that. You'll know the Duke of Wellington, right? The Duke of Wellington was on the first train on the L&M shortly before Lime Street was opened. That's how old Lime Street is. Also, I'm not sure if it's the first documented fatality on a railway line. It certainly was one of the most well publicised, because there was a chap who was a dignitary by definition. Again, this is topical because the Harry Potter train isn't running up the West Highlands because the doors won't lock. I know some people are very, very upset about it, but by the same token, the kind of people have been opening doors and walking out onto the railway and been getting squished, unfortunately, since for 188 years, or slightly less than. So that's how old Liverpool Lime Street is. So fair play to Liverpool Lime Street. Great job. Well done, the station staff, keeping it running for 188 years. Everybody at Liverpool, take a bow. Well done. So I said that Crown Street was the original terminus of the L&M. We're done reminiscing about the L&M. And the terminus at Crown Street was then replaced by Lime Street. And it kind of goes through the city. So if you're familiar with Lime Street yourself, you will know that between Crown Street and Lime Street, there is a big effing tunnel. It is approximately from Edge Hill to Lime Street. It is an enormous cutting. It's about 1.5 kilometres. I'm sorry, I don't have the signalling plan, so I don't actually know exactly how long it is. And that will get you into Lime Street, which is... The reason they moved it was because if you do know Crown Street, you'll realise that it's a wee bit further out of the town. So they managed to get cut a cutting through from Edge Hill up into Lime Street, and it delivers you pretty much an extra 1.5 kilometres, as I said, into the city centre, which is great if you want to walk about Liverpool. So that's the first thing. How old Lime Street was the thing that blew my mind. The second thing that blew my mind when I started trying to make this episode is that I thought I knew everything. I thought I'm a big fat juicy know-it-all, and I'll just go and record what I know about Lime Street controls, and it'll all be dandy. And then I started to read about... Well, I started looking for documents and some supporting information about what I'm about to tell you about Lime Street and Lime Street controls, and I found quite a lot of conflicting information. So what I'll start with is the story I heard about Lime Street controls, and then I will give you some of the conflicting statements that I've found, and in amongst all that we'll pick out not quite what's the truth, but what we can say for certain about Lime Street and Lime Street controls, whether they're a good idea or not, and where some potential dangers may lie. So it's about to get a bit fractious, but I'm going to try and to prevent any too many angry comments and people shouting at me on the internet. I will try and present as many sides as I can, and we will start with my story about, or what I thought I knew about Lime Street controls. So let's look at a little PowerPoint then, and we'll talk about platform sharing. So if you have been on a train in the UK from a terminal station, or even from a fairly big through station like Newcastle or York, something along those lines, where there's quite a lot of trains come in from different routes, and there's a bit of a mixed bag of traffic, maybe even a good mix of operators nowadays, or just a big terminal station where, again, there are a lot of different routes to different places, so you've got different types, different formations of trains. So my understanding of what happened at Lime Street is that at Lime Street, being a terminal station with a narrow throat, there was an instance sometime perhaps in the 80s, and there were a number of occupied platforms, and probably the story involved some perturbed working, so trains running late, some trains running early, some trains cancelled, things not being in the places that they were meant to be. Back in BR days, it was all juggled fairly, it was handballed by signals. And the story goes that, let's say, for example, Platform 1. Platform 1 was suitable for 8 cars, or you could put into it 2 sets of 4 or a 6 and a 2, because Lime Street controls did not yet exist. We're about to invent them by having an enormous up. So, 8 car platform. Signaller is juggling trains that are off timetable. Maybe somebody's chucked an extra coach on there, you don't really know. But there is a 4 car set in Platform 1, and the signaller, thinking that it's empty for an 8 car set, or maybe only has a 2 in it, tries to add a 6 on top of what they think is a 2, therefore giving you 8 and making your platform full. But actually there's 4 cars already in that platform, so the signaller adds a 4 to a 6 and gets 10, and therefore leaves quite a number of carriages, well, two, but quite a length of carriage, 2 carriage lengths sprawled out across the throat of Lime Street, thereby completely banjaxing it. Banjaxing, that's banjaxed. The whole thing is banjaxed. It's about as salacious a word as I can use on YouTube. So the whole station throat is banjaxed, trains are late, passengers are angry, people are up in arms, somebody's written to their MP, people are tearing down statues of the Duke of Wellington. Okay, right, it's maybe gone a bit far, but you can imagine. So it's a narrow station throat. There are only 2 lines bringing you through that cutting from Edge Hill, and by stranding the butt end of the train across the throat of the station and straddling the points, you basically locked up the whole station and pretty much shut the shop for the rest of the day, potentially. By the time you figure out how to reverse that train out, again, coming up through the cutting, maybe you've queued up the next train behind that train, so you actually, rather than just reversing out the train that you've stuck in, you've actually trapped that train across the throat. Then you can't get the next train behind it into a different platform because it's the back end of the first train that you jammed in is straddling all the points. So you're really stuck until you can figure out a way to maybe bring out 3 or 4 trains and reverse them out of the Edge Hill cutting. That is the story that I heard. And that makes sense because of the way Lime Street controls work. And how do they work? Well, I'm going to show you. We'll look at a different system now then. Track circuit block. And you can see right away that track circuit block is most commonly associated with colour light signalling. So we're going to take our track and divide it up into sections. You can see at either end of these rails we're placing an insulated rail joint IRJ or insulated block joint IBJ. It's exactly the same thing, but people use those terms interchangeably. Now, into our isolated section of rail, we'll have a power supply at one end, which will feed the current directly into the rails. At the other end, approximately no more than 1,000 metres away, we'll take that current and feed it into the coil of a relay. And for the other side of it, to complete our circuit, we return back to the rail and back to our power supply at the end. Okay, then a wee bit more terminology now. When we speak about track circuits, we talk about them being either clear or occupied. Now this track circuit is clear, and that means that the relay is energised. When we talk about relays, we tend to use up or down, in case we mix up energised and de-energised during phone conversations. So with this relay energised up and the track circuit clear, we can use the contacts of this relay to do other things, such as activate light circuits. Commonly you see lights activated in the box if a track circuit is clear. Now, to make our track circuit occupied, we bring in our rail wheels. And as our train proceeds along our track, all you need to know about electricity is that it's lazy and it likes to go the shortest path. If you want to get a little bit more technical, there is less resistance in the path across the wheels than there is in the path along the rails. And that will short out our circuit and our relay is de-energised. As you can see, our lights illuminating the signals panel as a result of the relay being de-energised or down will also go out. So now you know how track circuits work. I'm going to show you how to use them to give you Lime Street controls. So I have got our imaginary station, Signalton, representing Lime Street, the terminal station. And you can see that I've divided platform 1 into 227 track circuit and 225 track circuit. So those parts are insulated from each other, so they are individual track circuits. Now, this is slightly salacious. This is a little bit saucy. Because I've used numbers for my track circuits. Now that is very common in Scottish practice. It's more common in England and Wales to find that your track circuits are given letter names, and indeed it is pretty much standard practice to give track circuit IDs with letters. However, You will find that in Scotland, if there is a large area that is track circuited in there, given numbers, then unless you're changing all of the track circuits at one time, it would potentially be viewed as confusion to, if you happen to be tinkering with two or three track circuits, you wouldn't throw in a BD AA track circuit in the middle of 225 and 227. Just there's not enough benefit from changing one to the other to outweigh the fact that you would have two lettered track circuits in the middle of the set of numbers. So you will still find it quite common for track circuits in Scotland to be numbered, particularly the older the installation is. And since I just prefer it, I just don't like track circuits or letters. I just don't like it. Then because of that, I'll be using numbers. But it may cause outrage on me. It may cause outrage on my colleagues. So I have set up my track circuits in the station 227, 225, and you will see that they approximate largely to the length of the 3-car set. Now, right away you'll be able to figure out one of the things you have to do before you set up your line street controls is to figure out what sort of units you're going to be using and what sort of configurations your operator wants to use them. And that hasn't changed since BR days, although the operators have changed. You still need to figure out what units you're using, what lengths they're going to be, and again, you might want to set up. If you go for the train regular commuter, you will probably find your train on platform X, and the odd time it will be on platform Y. But generally, train patterns dictate that your train leaves from the same platform all the time. So you might set up different platforms, different lengths. Potentially, that's outside changes. And you'll see why when you see how this works. So in this instance, I've got 3 cars in platform 1. I want to add another 3. How is it all going to play out? Well, I'll shrink us down a little bit so we can get a bit more scale and we can see what happens slightly outside of the station. So 227 with my first 3 car in. 225 is clear. There's nothing in 225. So I've got space. And outside of the station, I'm going to have signal Sierra 15, which I'll henceforth call S15, because we're not doing any operations here. I'm not phoning the signal box. So we'll be calling it S15. So S15 is preventing anything else coming into my platform, which is full of train. And my next train is coming up. So I want to use Lime Street Control to get my next train in. So on approach to S15, I'm going to want to measure that train. And you tend to call this a measuring track. So this is a measuring track. And we set it out in the same length as 227 and 225. So for reasons which will be disclosed shortly, we'll call that 221 track. So 221 is our measuring track. And there's also a track circuit behind it, 219. And we also, because we're assuming that we're using track circuit block here, we have to prove that any other track circuits between signal S15 and platform 1 are also clear of trains, otherwise it's not going to work. So we need 223 in there. And we want to make sure that our train fits on 221. So we bring it to a stop at S15 signal. And unfortunately, because we said this was a busy station, so we need a set of points. So we've got 301 points in there. And there's our points. So we now have just about the full conditions to figure out how Lime Street Control is going to work here. So as we've said, 227 is occupied. Again, if 227 isn't occupied, then our Lime Street controls aren't going to work because we don't need them, because there's nothing in platform 1 in that instance. Again, it won't work with 225 occupied because that is the tail end of the platform. So if 225 is occupied, it doesn't work. So we need 225 clear, and that tells us that we have space for 3 cars. We need 301 normal. That's just because ahead of the signal you're looking for all of the conditions, so the point conditions. Otherwise, at S15 we might be trying to get something into platform 2, which I haven't drawn, to keep it simple. Keep it nice and simple. So we want 301 normal. We need 223 clear because there's not going to be any stopping or joining of trains in this area. So 223 has to be clear so that we can get into the platform. We also need 221 occupied. So it kind of does two things here. Not implicitly, but the first thing it does is, of course, the blue arrows there tell you it's the same length as that track circuit 225 that we want to fit that train into. So that is the proving. That is the how do you know? Okay, we know to such an extent as that the tracks haven't had any wrong side failures or even any right side failures. But with those 2 tracks clear, with 225 clear, we know that we have room for a 3 car. And with 221 occupied, we know, because there's so little wiggle room either side of the train, we kind of almost know that the train is at a stand. And with our last condition that we're looking for, 219 clear, we know that the train that's on 221 that has occupied 221 for us, we know that it isn't any longer than the track circuit at 225, because it's all very well known that you have space for a 3 car at 225, which 225 clear is proven for us. But you also need to prove that 219 is clear to prove that your next train that you're bringing in is not a 4 or a 6. So that is really an essential condition, is that you have the furthest along track circuit 227 occupied and the next one clear, and the track circuit 221 at your signal, which is going to permit access into the station, is occupied, and the one immediately before it, immediately on approach to 221, which is 219 in this instance, is clear. And that kind of, as like I say, as much as ruling out any failures, ill performance of the equipment, we've kind of proved that we have enough space to fit our train from S15 into platform 1. And what you will then find is, if the signal tries to take that off, you're not going to get anything better than red. So you will get a red with I'll throw you in some oldie school terminology here, cat's eyes. That is to say, 2 white lights at a horizontal, no, a 45 degree angle, and you would expect an indicator telling you which one of the platforms you're heading into. Again, if this was a 6 or 7 platforms as it is at Lime Street, I think there's 9. This, you want an indicator of which platform exactly it is you're going into, because you can't necessarily see that. So you're giving the driver a number 1, which tells the driver you're headed for platform 1, and the cat's eyes or position lights tells you you can proceed as far as the line ahead is clear. And what that's going to do for you is it's going to bring your train in at a very, very nice low speed. So you've probably been in a situation where you're a bit late for work. Maybe you didn't get a regular train, you got the next train, or you've been very well hydrated and the toilet on the train doesn't work, and you're hopping about at the doors desperate to get into that platform. But unfortunately, if you're coming into an occupied platform, the main signal is red. You've been given a subsidiary signal which tells you this route ahead, you can proceed, but it's not clear. So you're only proceeding as far as up to the tail lights of that first train. So everything will be nice and slow. So you will crawl into the platform. So it is a good control. It makes sure that you don't put anything into platform 1 that is too long. But there's always a but. Let's have a look at the but. And its but looks like this. If you've set up your 227, your 225 and your 221 track in a set length, that is for a set configuration and set numbers of a particular type of unit. Now there are DMUs and EMUs and BMUs and I don't know, ostriches. So unfortunately it kind of ties in your platform usage to a certain type of rolling stock. So it doesn't give you quite as much flexibility. It can be very expensive to change the setup of your Lime Street controls. And it's in the implementation phase, it is more outlay to set up as well. So signaling engineers tend to not want to give up control of what trains going to what platforms and take Lime Street controls out or not have them. Maybe we're just control freaks, I don't know. But we tend to regard human beings in the system as the most fallible bit because they are. Human beings are rubbish. Signaling engineers don't like them in their signaling systems. Unfortunately, they do signaling, they do train operations, they do train driving, they do passengering. So all of these things open to human error. It's obviously around stations when things get busy, when things go wrong. I spoke in episode 1 about the Swiss cheese model. Again, no angry comments from statisticians. It's when things are going wrong is when you can easily make a mistake, like you try to put a 4-car into a 3-car space. So it seems like an obvious thing that you wouldn't do, but it's very, very simple. When other things are going wrong, signallers have much bigger areas to cover now, so there's a level crossing to be dealt with. Maybe there's a possession, or maybe there's a track failure somewhere else. The station's working fine, but then because of the track failure, the train's running late. That train's meant to go into platform 2, but platform 2 is actually full because the driver hasn't turned up and that hasn't left on time. And then you go and put your 4-car into a 3-car space. Oh no, I've put a 4-car into a 3-car space. Seems like a crazy thing that you wouldn't do, that any sensible signaller would never do, but it happens. So that's why we like to have this control, but yes, it is expensive and it is a bit unwieldy once it's been set down. Now, before I move on from this, I will cover one more thing. Wait, I just realised a slight error that I have made. Again, I told you, human beings make mistakes, are fallible. So, the main reason that I have heard, again, since I've started investigating Lime Street controls, I basically question everything that I know. But the reason I have heard for not using numbers for track circuits is, as you can see, I've got S15 signal, I've got 301 points, I've got 221 track, platform 1. So if you use letters to differentiate your track circuits, AA track, AB track, then it makes them easier to pick out on your scheme plans and it makes them easier to see on your layout, and there's less chance of you mixing it up with a point number. Now, I was going to say that you can see from mine, as a typical Scottish signalling plan is, there's clear differentiation between the signal numbers, 15, the track numbers 223, and the point numbers, 301. But obviously, there is very, very close potential for my 301 points to be mixed up with a track circuit because I unwittingly got those numbers close together. And you tend to have a lot of track circuits in your layout, so my track circuits reaching up to 301 is a possible thing. So that is what I did this totally unintentionally. I've just realised it now. But that is why you use letters. But I just don't like it, so I didn't do it. But I should have. My point numbers should have been in the thousands. My point number should have been 1001, perhaps. But it's too late now. We're not changing it. We've demonstrated why you wouldn't do it. Wonderful demonstration. Well done. I said that was my understanding of Lime Street control then. And before we get into the revelations. Let me be clear, that is how modern and, well, I don't know if I'll quite say current, but that is how Lime Street control in many track circuit block, that is to say, what you might call colour light signalling systems, works. That is how it works. That's what it does. It does all that with DMUs and EMUs. Signalling trains into occupied platforms. That is what it does. However, when I started looking for the actual details of the incident that caused this situation, I found some allegations. Now, these allegations are that on the 26th of August, we're kind of keeping it anniversarial, the 26th of August 1924, there was an accident in Lime Street. Now, here the accident goes a little something like this. So here we've got a layout mocked up, and we've taken out the track circuits. We've left our points in. We left 301 points in just for a bit of familiarity. And we shall see how it is supposed to perform before the accident and what went wrong from a signalling point of view. So our train appears and is signalled into the platform. Now, this train has 2 locomotives. Nothing unusual about that. Nice day for the enthusiasts at Lime Street. And there are some instructions now for the drivers, some standing written instructions. And I'm going to read them out with their clause numbers because they get referred to later on. So clause 2, engine drivers working trains into Lime Street, okay, that's our 2 guys on the right hand side here, must have their engines detached as soon as they come to a stand, unless otherwise instructed. Okay, so clause 5. In cases where drivers are required to either back their trains out, so not uncoupling, we're just pushing this train out backwards, propelling. In cases where drivers are required to either back their trains out or to bank a train, that's to say, if another loco comes to the back end of this train and helps drive it out of the platform, banking is when you're still attached at the back and you're helping out. So in cases where drivers are either required to back their trains out or to bank a train to Edgehill or Wavertree, they must be so instructed. So if you're going to do that, you have to receive instructions. In no case must a train be banked to Edgehill or Wavertree by more than one engine. So you can see that's clause 6. In no case must a train be banked to Edgehill or Wavertree by more than one engine. So that's pretty definite. So in our case, you can see that these 2 locos cannot push this train from the back as it goes back out to the left here towards Edgehill. And clause number 9 says, in cases where a train is worked into Lime Street with 2 engines, so we've got here, such engines must remain coupled together until cleared out of the platform lines, unless the drivers are otherwise instructed. Now, who's given all these instructions? So keep in mind this is 1924. Everyone on the railway has nice hats and suits and waistcoats, whistles and flags. So there is a chap appointed at the end of the platform to sort all this out, and he's given instructions. I say he because it's a man in this instance. He is given instructions to the loco drivers, to other station staff, and given instructions to the signaller. What happens then is, as per standard and accepted practice, an additional loco comes in to the Edgehill end of the train. The 2 drivers at the other end, there are 2 separate drivers, not 2 locos with 2 drivers, it's with 1 driver, it's 2 locos working together. The first train is referred to in the report as the pilot engine, the black one. So the driver of the pilot engine, remembering clause 6, in no case must a train be banked to Edgehill or Wavertree by more than one engine. So they are uncoupled, which is not in accordance with clause 9. And trains where, like cases where trains are with two engines are worked into Lime Street, the engines must remain coupled together until cleared out of the platforms, unless the drivers are otherwise instructed. Now, they haven't received any instructions at this point. The chap who's in charge of all of the movements is busy. He doesn't really keep an eye on the train coming in, so he doesn't notice that it's double-headed. So he does notice that it leaves. As you can see, it's about to do. There it goes. And he now assumes that that whole train, including that pilot engine, the black one, has gone out to Edge Hill. You can probably already work out what's going to happen for yourself. So our inspector doesn't see the double-headed train arrive. He is able to observe a train leave with an engine at the back, so he thinks that's banking out. Although he himself would be aware of the instructions that he should have expressly instructed the drivers to do that, afterwards, in the aftermath, himself and the drivers all agree that it was understood that that move was always made. The loco always came in with that train and it always banked it out, and they didn't really ever stop to give the instruction. Of course, that's not what it says in the rules, in the written instructions. But they were so used to doing that task, again, a bit like the driver at college, if you've watched episode 1, which I hope you have. You get used to a certain way of operating, and when it goes wrong, when something out of the ordinary happens, things start to fall apart. Again, the signaller in this instance, you've got a number of platforms here that have got train moves coming in and out, busy with passengers. You can see the amount of additional moves that are needed here because you don't have DMUs and EMUs and BMUs. You've got locos. You've got locos detaching from passenger services. You've got locos coming out, detaching from trains and going back in. There are a lot of moves going on here. So the signaller is working all of these platforms, physically working the levers, physically by eye keeping track of where trains are. So in all of that, the signaller admits that he did not observe the train going in as double-headed. He saw the tail lamps, he saw the end of the train, which you're duty bound to observe to make sure the train's complete and a piece hasn't detached and been left somewhere. So the signaller, again, same as the inspector, observed the train coming in, looked at the rear of it, signalled in the engine to take it out, and saw it leaving with a banking engine. So they both assumed then that a full train came in with one engine and left with one engine at the rear. So before the inspector gives the signalman his next instructions, a platform inspector is trying to get protection for a team of men who are unloading mail bags near the bottom of platform 7. So the procedure for the black locomotive should be to come up to the end of the platform so that the signaller can see it and so that the signaller knows it's there and it needs to be signalled out. As that driver is doing that, as he is following the rules to do that movement, a platform inspector, I assume from the notes subservient to the overall inspector who's at the other end of the platform, has a team of chaps unloading mail bags. What is this? This is a real history lesson. Unloading mail bags by hand in the on the forefoot. Anyway, I digress. It's an interesting digression, but I digress nonetheless. A platform inspector stops the locomotive just as he's setting off to head towards the end of the platform so that the signaller can see him, and asks him to stop because the mailbag activity is ongoing. At this point, the main inspector instructs the signaller to bring another train in, and he instructs him to put it in platform 7, which they both believe to be empty. The trains, which according to the report have a combined weight of approximately 400 tonnes, come together at, it says about 3 or 4 miles an hour. Now 3 or 4 miles an hour is not much, but when it's 400 tonnes, yeah, just let that sink in. So a number of passengers were slightly injured and greatly put out by their 400-ton collision at 4 miles an hour. So that was the accident. And I shall read to you the remarks by the Secretary to the Minister of Transport, Major G.L. Hall, who tells the Minister he's our obedient servant, apparently. The remarks by our obedient servant, Major, I presume retired, G.L. Hall, are this. There is one simple and well understood safeguard against accidents of the kind. That is to say, track circuiting. So that's not exactly Lime Street control. Of course, track circuits would indicate the presence of that loco, but it's not quite as I understand Lime Street controls to be. So that's interesting. What I have heard, what I've read online from various sources, is that when Lime Street was re-signalled, the Lime Street controls were to make sure that once the whole train was in, there was still adequate space actually to get that second locomotive, in this case the third locomotive, to come into the back of the train and fit in. So I think what has happened is that over the years, as DMUs and EMUs have come into play and different formations and lengths, I think probably Lime Street control has evolved from that, from making sure there's room enough for an engine at one end, to being used to measure out our 3 cars and 4 cars and make sure that our platform fits nicely. So that's quite interesting. I find that quite interesting that I had a very, very fixed idea of what Lime Street control was and how it developed and how it worked. And that is how it works today. He says, mostly how it works today, but we're actually going through another of these evolutions, which I'll come to in a minute. Before we go into the evolution of Lime Street controls, I want to pick up on some of the points from this Ministry of Transport report on the London, Midland and Scottish Railway, 1924. So some of the things I want to pick up on are about similarities with episode 1, things, accidents that happened decades apart. So here's the first thing I'm going to pick out. Prior to the arrival of the excursion train involved in this collision, number 7 platform road had been occupied by the 2:35 p.m. regular passenger train from Euston. So that's the first train, which arrived about 10 minutes late at 6:46 p.m. So here's the first thing. Late running trains. Signallers, I've said it in episode 1, say it in episode 2. Signallers are I said it properly in episode 1. Signallers are an enormous asset. Something which I know is a big focus at Network Rail at the minute is managing when the timetable falls down, and it's because it leads to so much disturbance, and it's a big task for signallers, and I don't think we give them enough credit for it. Well, those of us who work in the railway and those of us who don't know anything about it obviously don't give them any credit for it. Many of us who work in the railway often see signallers as a bit of a pain. That is the nicest way I can put that on YouTube. Sorry, Dad. My dad was a signaller, by the way. If you haven't watched my About Me video, among many other things. So, late running train leading to an accident. How not unusual. Okay, we're talking about the pilot engine. This engine did not draw up to the platform starting signal, as would have been the usual course. So things are out of the ordinary. Just takes one small thing. It says, owing to the fact that the driver had been stopped by the platform inspector, who took this action for the protection of a number of men engaged in moving mail bags. So yeah, again, back to the Swiss cheese, if the mail bags hadn't been there, if this train hadn't been late, would things have been different? We'll move on. So again, looking at the clauses here for the instructions given to the drivers, it's a little bit like college, where following the instructions to the letter could have been interpreted differently by the driver, possibly. Again, the drivers here, it says, in no case must a train be banked to Edgehill or Wavertree by more than one engine. So the drivers know that they have to not bank those two engines, so the white and the black must be uncoupled. But in other cases, it also says they must have their engines detached as soon as they come to a stand, unless otherwise instructed. And also, in cases where a train is worked into Lime Street with two engines, such engines must remain coupled together until cleared out of the platform lines, unless the drivers are otherwise instructed. So that's not so much, there are conflicting instructions there, but actually 2 and 9 and 5 actually require the drivers to have stayed together and not have banked out towards Edgehill and Wavertree without being specifically instructed. So they're kind of working, and the inspector and the drivers all agreed that they kind of understood that they would just do that without being instructed. So this is a little bit more a case of not following the rules, but the rules are also slightly conflicting as well. So again, here is another thing. It is 2024. This happened in 1924, and here is another item that is still quite. If you go to any briefing, any safety briefing anywhere in the UK, I'm making a lot of sweeping statements here, but I believe this will be true. You will find people talking about communication. So here it says, on its arrival, Davies, who is the inspector, gave no orders, nor to his knowledge did anyone else, to the enginemen as to their future movements, as it is understood by all concerned that this train is banked to Edgehill by the engine which brings it in. So there they are, Davies is saying, look, we all knew this is how it goes. The train that brings it, the engine that brings in this train, backs it out. That's contrary to the instructions, but it's understood by everybody. So yeah, everybody knows what we're supposed to do, but we didn't follow the instructions, and then the instructions aren't clear because Davies didn't go and give the instructions, and that's where it fell down. Communication. So Davies, the inspector, didn't give the instructions, didn't communicate his instructions to the engine drivers. The engine drivers didn't come and communicate to Davies, well, there are two engines here, and the rules say we can't bank out with two engines. And that would have, two engines, I didn't know you had two engines. That would have resolved it. So communication is also a factor in this accident, as it is in a lot of accidents, even up to the present day. Again, the train from Euston had come to a stand. Davies told the signalman to hold it there until he had decided whether to put it in number 7 or number 10 road. So this is back to your Swiss cheese. And it says, after seeing the length of the train, Davies decided that the train would enter road 7. So had 10 been longer, had the train not been as long, you might have on another day picked a different place for the train to go and the accident wouldn't have happened. Swiss cheese, so many similarities to all of the accidents that you see. This opportunity could have been taken. People could have taken a different action. Things just might have been different on a different day. We're talking about the signalman now. He only observed the rear part of the train as it passed his box. Again, like I said, he was busy performing other duties. It says he looked out of the window at the east end and on the south side of his box to observe number 7 road, but saw nothing there. He added that if the engine had then been standing at the point where the collision subsequently took place, he could not have failed to see it. So what the signaller is saying is, yeah, I looked out the window, busy day, did it quickly, but if that loco hadn't been stopped by the team with the mailbags, it would have been spotted by the signaller. So there's another opportunity, another piece in the Swiss cheese. But the fact is that the signaller obviously looked very quickly, because I think the description is that you could have seen it had he looked properly. So that's a bigger, not looking properly, that creates a bigger hole in the Swiss cheese. That was one point where if the signaller had looked properly at Road 7, he would have seen that it had the black logo in it. But he didn't. He just had a quick look. It had been stopped. So he looked at the time where it had been stopped. It was only stopped briefly, obviously, because it then proceeded further on before the collision happened. So here is an interesting part. Charles Smith, the driver of the train engine. So this is the second engine on the first train. So the white engine coming into the station, is one of 8 men whose regular work includes the driving of this train from Crewe to Lime Street. He said that he did not uncouple his engine as per the instructions unless otherwise instructed from the train, as he was well aware it was required as a banker to take to Edge Hill. It appears from his evidence to have been well understood thing that the drivers in his link that the incoming engine is to be used to bank the empties to Edge Hill, the order to do so being therefore assumed. So there's a massive assumption there, and it's not just an assumption, it's standard practice. But checking on assumptions in engineering projects as well as in operations, as well as doing things on the ground, doing things in projects, checking your assumptions, learning a healthy mistrust for assumptions should be your superpower. If you want to become an engineer, you will have to. There's an old saying that goes, never assume, because you make an ass of you and me. And it's a good phrase, but it's not true. Sometimes you can't move forward without making some assumptions on the project scope or some of the stakeholder inputs, what they're going to be. But you have to be very careful with your assumptions. You have to treat them with the utmost suspicion and verify them as much and as often as you can. So that assumption led to the driver of the white train not uncoupling from the first train. Again, that would have come to the attention of, that's maybe not second nature to you and I, but the inspector and the signaller not seeing an engine attached to the back of that train as it left. They would have known that that train could only have got into the platform with an engine or two at the front, and they would be thinking, oh, where's the engine gone? So Charles Smith, the white engine driver, disobeyed the rules because he assumed that he was to bank out and didn't get the instruction for that. Contributed. It's another hole in the Swiss cheese. So the driver of the black engine, driver Price of the pilot engine, said that on arrival of the train he uncoupled his engine, knowing that the train was to be used for banking, and that, in accordance with clause 6 of the instructions, only one engine was allowed for this purpose. No order was given to him in the matter. So guys are just kind of doing stuff on their own. Now it's about to get Thomas in the tank engineering, because it says when the train left, Price started about 40 yards behind and was stopped by the platform inspector, Inspector Jump. There you go. There's your Thomas the Tank Engine bit for you. And he was Inspector Jump was in charge of the men moving the mail bags. I don't know what Inspector Jump did when the second train came in on top of Price's loco. I don't know if the mailbag guys were just left to their own devices at that point. It's not mentioned in the report. But the incoming driver Freeman of the excursion train, said that after standing a few minutes at the down home signal, it was lowered. It was lowered for him to proceed to number 7 platform. Now that's only highlighted. There's no technical reason for that to be highlighted, other than I know that some of you will find the idea of a signal being lowered exceptionally sexy. That is sexy signalling for some of you. For me personally, of course, as an engineer, signalling engineer, lowered quadrant signals they're a bit naughty. They're definitely, I think, now I'm just going off the top of my head here, so if I'm wrong, get me in the comments. But I don't think, I'm pretty sure that lower quadrant signals will be banned for any new work. And there may be existing mainline signals. So we're talking about semaphores here, semaphores that when they are at stop, we'll say, then they are horizontal, and they're at 45 degrees when they are at proceed. So they can go up, as probably most current ones in the UK mainline do, or they can drop down. Now, if you've been to a heritage, if you're watching my show, then you probably have been to some heritage railways, I suspect. One of the very cool things that people get excited about is signals that drop down to 45 degrees instead of going up, because that is kind of more old-timey. And yeah, so there you have it. Into Lime Street, the signals were lowered instead of raised. So that's all that's in there for. That's the sexy signalling bit. And yeah, he estimates that he crashed into the loco at the speed of about 3 or 4 miles an hour. As I said, it's not a great deal of speed, but at 400 tonnes, that's pretty unsavoury. So let me bring you back. I'm bringing you back through time. We're leaving the steam era and we're back at our Signalton station. We've got our Lime Street controls and our measuring track set up for our 3 cars. We've got our berth track. This would be called a berth track. So you're measuring on the berth track. The track circuit immediately on approach to the signal. That is on approach, as if you were the driver of the train. You are approaching the signal. So this is full on Lime Street control. What I have now heard, what I've heard recently, and what I've seen online, what I'm reading, unfortunately I don't have access to the current Lime Street signalling plan. If you do, let us know in the comments. While you're clicking on those comments, don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. You'll get the next one in 2 weeks. You'll help us grow the channel, help us reach more people. Thank you. But if you didn't like it, don't like it. If you thought it was rubbish, let me know. If you thought I needed to enunciate more, let me know. Because I do get excited about signalling and I go talking very fast. So, if you think about this layout, 227 track, 225 track, 221 track, these tracks aren't really essential for operations if you don't need to measure trains into these platforms. For example, if I ask the operations team, do you have any intention of sharing platforms, splitting and joining trains, anything like that, and they say no, then we're not doing Lime Street controls unless ops particularly plan to have platform sharing. So I believe that the Network Rail approach at the moment is to say we will not include Lime Street controls in a lot of places, in most places, or if we were to go and re-signal Lime Street, which is what happened, I believe it was planned in 2018. I haven't seen much output of that. It's been a little bit difficult for me to dig through. There are some articles telling me that it was proposed to remove Lime Street controls from Lime Street. Some people are saying that it did happen, some people are saying it didn't happen, so I don't want to go either way. If you have personal knowledge, you can let me know. But I have also heard this in relation to other schemes said that the Lime Street controls will be removed. So if you look at that as a system, it is sets of power supplies, relays, cabling, all sorts of extra failure points in there that you don't need. You don't need 225 and 221 track circuit to be those particular lengths. They could be longer, so you could cut down. If you could, if this was a larger station, then you multiply that by how many lines you've got coming into the station. you're removing a big number of failure points. And if it's a re-signalling scheme, when it comes to actually implementing it, all of these things have to be tested. So you have to test the normal running of simulating bringing in of the first train, then bringing in the train on top of it. If you don't have Lime Street controls, you only need to bring in one train from that signal. If you're not platform sharing, you only need to do that once. You don't need to then go through the somewhat convoluted rigmarole of bringing in a train as if you were using your Lime Street controls the way I have it here. So it's less boots on the ground, testing, installing things, less things that can go wrong. So from an overview point of view, cost, it's certainly reduced cost from not implementing Lime Street controls. My personal worry is that sometimes, of course, modern layouts are run by ARS, so automatic route setting. So a train approaches platform 1 and the computer system knows based on what train it is and based on input from the timetable that it needs to take S15 signal off and signal that train into platform 1 under the Lime Street controls. And that's all well and good. The signaller at that point is just supervising the system. But my concern is that when you take Lime Street control away, you then, when the system falls down, when we have that train running late as we did in the original accident, as we did at College, that's when things start to go wrong, and that's when the signaller needs to either intervene or, if they don't have ARS, to work harder. And again, one of the arguments for removing Lime Street control is that you eliminate those costs of implementing it and the complexity of it in your layout. But now, modern planning for train operations is much, much better than it was when Lime Street control was originally needed. So things like train platform and docking arrangements, these are all planned ahead by computer, etc. There's some very, very complicated systems used to plan timetables, and that spills over into those systems will give you data on what platforms you can use. You tell them what the lengths of your platforms are, what your train stock is, and they will churn out your platforming diagram for you. So the theory is that signallers then have less work to do in figuring out which trains to put in which platform, and that's certainly true. But again, as I said earlier, one of the big things that has been invested in at the moment, and Network Rail is very keen on, is traffic management systems. So systems for managing the traffic flow when trains are running late, when things are going out of the ordinary. And again, as a signalling engineer, that just makes me a little bit uneasy that taking away that Lime Street control puts that pressure back onto the signaller of when things go wrong, when things fall down, even if they have been better planned than in the olden days. And I mean, when I started, not in 1924, but in the 80s and the 90s, when maybe platforming was sort of your best guess and then let the signallers pick the bones out of it. But no, even with that better planning, I personally am still a little bit uneasy about the removal of Lime Street controls. But as I said, traffic management systems are a hot topic. They're something that Network Rail is very keen on, wisely so, and it should take care of any worries about putting the wrong trains into the right platforms or the right platforms into the wrong trains. I don't know, it's late. I got that a bit mixed up. But you get the idea. Traffic management systems are here to save the day. And I know a number of contractors working on those. So that is your brief on Lime Street controls. You've had my point of view on it. You've got Network Rail's point of view on it. Save the taxpayer a few pennies. Being furthest there, you can save substantial amounts on not implementing Lime Street controls, as long as the traffic management systems pick up the slack, or the signallers keep doing a good balancing act, and keeping us all out of trouble and locking up any more stations. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let me know if you have any comments on it. If you've got any inside knowledge on Lime Street, let me know, because it's actually bugging me on a personal level that I don't know. I don't have access to the signalling plans, as I said. So that's it. Thank you. I'll see you in 2 weeks.